Good morning, Shalom Uvracha, B'Shus Rosh Beth Din Dayan Gelley, President of the United Synagogue, Michael Goldstein, Dayan Ehrentreu, your daughter who is here with you, of course, and Charlotte Duna, amongst others of the Neshei Chayil who are here, Dayan Duna Shlita, who is son-in-law of the Dayan Simons, Choshev Rabbonim, Moirav Rabbeisai. Hopefully that includes everybody. I'm standing here because this would have been opened by the Chief Rabbi, but the Chief Rabbi unfortunately is indisposed and not able to be with us this morning, but of course sends his very best greetings and wishes to this gathering. Likewise, the chair of RCUS, Rabbi Pini Hakenbroch, who would have made the opening address at this moment, unfortunately has to be to Levaya, is not able to be here, so likewise sends his best wishes. Bruchim haboim to this very special Chanukah learning program, Le'ilui Nishmas Meirenu V'Rabbeinu, Harav Hagon Hagodl Dayan Chanukah-themed Ehrentreu, Zeicher Tzadik V'Kosh Livrocha. This morning is an opportunity for us as the Rabbinate of the United Synagogue, together of course with the Chief Rabbinate, with the Office of the Chief Rabbi, together with the United Synagogue, with our esteemed Beth Din. We welcome of course also Chief Executive of the United Synagogue, Stephen Wilson, who is here with us this morning, to be able to do something very special, Le'ilu Nishmas Dayan. It's perhaps important to make clear that this morning is not about hespedim, formal eulogies or tributes which wouldn't be appropriate on Chanukah, but what it is about is that which was the number one passion of the Dayan, and that was Talmud Torah. It's also our opportunity to be able to launch something very special. Rabbi Moshe Morris, who has been the principal Ezev Achisomach of the Dayan and the Rebbetzin in so very many ways, is coordinating a program whereby there will be a Siyum Hashas Le'ilui Nishmas Dayan in terms of the first Yortzeit, and the Rabbinical Council United Synagogue is taking on Maseches Sanhedrin. Details of how to be involved, sign up, will be distributed through our usual Rabbinical Council channels in the very next short while. And this is a wonderful opportunity together with this morning for us as a rabbinate to be able to play our part in paying tribute to the memory of someone who was just so special to each and every one of us. We all have our special memories and stories, our Ma'aseh Rav. I owe a particular deep hakaras hatov to the fact that when we began to build and opened Mikveh Eishes Chayil at Raleigh Close, the Dayan was our ultimate halachic authority, and he very kindly afforded me an hourly, weekly kaviyus for several years to assist me in becoming more proficient and knowledgeable in Hilchos Mikvos, to be able to help with this wonderful and great project. Talmud Torah was paramount to the Dayan and the underlying concern in all that he did and all that he achieved. And we know from many occasions when we came together as a rabbinate how much he would encourage us not only to give shiurim and to be marbitze Torah, but to be b'nei Torah who would grow in our connection to Torah, in our love for Torah, in our commitment to Torah. And I'm sure that this morning's gathering would have meant so much to him and would have been his greatest pleasure, and should be a zechus for his neshama in the olam ha'emes. I want to focus in the minutes I have allocated to me by way of introductory Divrei Torah to focus on two Mamori Chazal. One is a Gemara which appears in Ksuvas Kuf Gimel Amud Beis and also in Bava Metzia Pei Hey Amud Beis. Familiar to us all, Omar Rebbe Kama Gedolim Ma'asichia. The Gemara which refers to the greatness of the way in which Reb Chia conducted himself. And Reb Chia said about himself, Anoa Avidna LeTorah DeLetishtacha MiYisrael. I would make sure that Torah would not be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. My Avidna, says Reb Chia, what would I do? He said, Azilna v'shadida kitna. I'd go and plant flax, Ugadilna nishvi, and from the flax, when it's fully developed, I would make nets. V'tzaidna tavya, and I'd go and trap young animals, goats, sheep, whatever. Machilna bisrael yasme, I would feed the meat to orphans. Va'arichna megilta, and from the hides, from the cloth, I would make parchments. V'kasivna chamisha chumshe, and I would write on those parchments the chamisha chumshe Torah. Uslikna lamasa, and I would go to a place. Umakrina chamisha yenuke, I'd get 5 young children, b'chamisha chumshe, to take the 5 sections of the Torah. Umasnina shita yenuke shita sidre, and I would teach to 6 young children the 6 sections of the Mishnayos. V'amarna lahu, and I would say to them, ad hadrana v'asina, until I go away and come back, akru adodi, read this between yourselves, va'asnu adodi, and teach it to one another. Va'avdelo l'torah l'tishtachach miYisrael, and I would ensure in this way that Torah would not be forgotten from Yisrael. The Maharsha on that Gemara makes 2 observations about what was so great about the Ma'aseh here. Says the Maharsha, number 1, Shekol Ma'aseh hazeh l'Torahu. He says this whole Ma'aseh was all about Torah. You can ask a question. Rechia didn't have better things to do than to go out and to sow flax and to begin to spin the yarn, to make the nets and to trap the animals, and then to feed the meat to the yasme, to the orphans, etc. He says, Lo yabay shum shituf. He didn't want anything that was commercially produced. He wanted to make sure from very beginning to very end, if Torah is going to be propagated and maintained within Klal Yisrael, it's all got to be l'shem shamayim. It's all got to be absolutely sincere, without anything that would render it tainted in some way, because it wouldn't have the purity of being from its very inception, earlier stages, being purely l'shem shamayim. That's number 1 that Maharsha says. Number 2, he makes the point. Ad da'asina, when I come back, I want you to be akru v'ahanu adodi. Teach and share this with one another. Shekol echad na'aseh lo meid u'melamed. Each one of those 5 children given the chamisha chamushi Torah or the 6 shita sidrei Mishnah would both learn and teach to others. Shehu malo elyona b'Torah, which is the highest level in Torah. Al yedei zeh lo tishtakach Torah miYisrael. Through this, Torah will not be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. I think these 2 he'oros of the Maharsha are absolutely at idem with who and what the Dayan was and what he was to each and every one of us. He was prepared to roll up his sleeves and get involved, as we've heard from Maspidim until now. He was prepared to do things himself and always absolutely l'shem shamayim. And he also understood the importance of empowerment, to get people to learn and to empower people to teach as well. There are 4 particular ma'asim which I wanted to reference at this particular moment, which speak to me. One I just checked out with Dayan Duna a little bit earlier this morning, goes back to the time when I was learning in Koil in Liverpool in the early 1980s. And there was a bit of a rush because Dayan Ehrentreu was going to be in town because he was going to Woolton Jail. Why was a Dayan going to Woolton Jail? I don't know if the Rebbe remembers this story. There was a particular woman who was in danger of being aguna, and her husband was imprisoned in Woolton Jail. So Dayan went and he took with him the necessary people to be the Eidim and the Sofer, and he went into the jail to see this prisoner, to have the get written so it could be given over al yedei shliach, in order to ensure there wouldn't be an agun in Yisrael. That's the extent to which the Dayan cared and the efforts he put in. I think he even came into the kollel in the afternoon, gave a shiur, but they really made such an impression on us. A second story from many years later, when I was sitting with the Dayan in Shiur Park one Chol Hamoed, and there was a phone call from Eretz Yisrael, from the base of Medrash of Rav Eliashiv. Rav Eliashiv's Gabba was phoning up to talk over with the Dayan the Torahs Rav Eliashiv had spoken over Yom Tov. And I was just sitting there as an observer in the background. It was absolutely fascinating. It was on loudspeaker. The Dayan was happy to listen in. And the Gabba was laughing each and every time. Each shtickle Torah, each piece of Torah, which the Gabba started and said, B'Shem Rabbi Elyashiv, the Dayan was there already with the answer, with the Mahalach, and he said, the Dayan is me'oiskechat yedamov, the Dayan's ahead of me each and every time. He was there. These were Rabbi Elyashiv's Torahs, and the Dayan was absolutely there on the page, at the table, with the acknowledged Godel HaPoskim in Eretz Yisrael. The two other interesting maisim, which I can personally relate. On one occasion, I came in with my Mishnayos Mikvoros to learn with the Dayan, and there's an open pot of cosmetics, ladies' cosmetics on the table. Not the thing you normally expect to see when you come in. And the Dayan was there, and he said to me, he was troubled. He said, I've written a letter to to endorse this particular product. I don't think it's right. Maybe Rav David knows. He was chayz, I think, in the end, wasn't he, from the endorsement? He wrote back on the endorsement. But at the time, he was struggling because he wanted to help. He wanted to be there to assist. He felt bad about the person who'd come to him for the endorsement in the first place. He would have to withdraw it. But he also understood his responsibility. If it's not right al pi halacha, you can't do it. And that was the only thing which mattered. Maybe it would be embarrassing to withdraw one's endorsement. I've said originally you can, now I'm saying you can't. Didn't bother him. The only thing that mattered was what was right al pi halacha. I remember a similar thing at the time just before the Eruv went live. I was in Northwest London, Eruv went live, which in its day was controversial. I say in its day. Today, I think, is pretty much universally something which is accepted with appreciation by the Kehillah for whom the Dayan did this. But I said to him, at the time it was clear there was going to be a huge amount of opposition, difficulty. I said to the Dayan, is the Dayan sure he really wants to go ahead and do this? And he looked at me and he smiled. And he said, Mordechai, he said, if it's right al pi halacha, and people can benefit from it, and the tzibur need it, he said, it's not a question of what's going to be, it's only a question that one has no right not to do it. That's the achrayus of a posek, of a Rosh Beth Din, of a Godel B'Torah. Some of you may remember that here at Kinlos, I think it was the last Chief Rabbi's conference pre-COVID, that the Dayan spoke to us, and in his concluding words of Drush, he referred to an Orach Chaim HaKodesh on the laning which we read the end of Chanukah, on Zois Chanukas, B'yom Shneim Osa Yom Nosi Livnei Naftali Achira Ben Einon. It's interesting, why was the Nosi of Naphtali and the Shevet that's mentioned last, as far as the Nasim, as far as the princes who brought for the dedication of the sanctuary, what's the significance of the name Achira Ben Einon? So the Orach Chaim HaKodesh says, Yirmo is al derech ma'moram zal. This is a remez, a hint to that which the sages say in the Sifri. B'posuk Naftali Svarotzen, the posuk in Zois HaBrocha. B'lamed she Naftali sameach b'chelkai. We can learn that Naphtali was happy with that which was his portion, b'yomim, b'dogim, b'fargios, with the seas, the bodies of water, the fish, the young chicks, Mali Birchas Hashem Yom Gineisar, the bracha of the sea of the Kinneret, Adkan. Says the Orach Chaim HaKodesh, what was the happiness of the Shevet Naphtali, of Achira Ben Einon? Mama, he says, the name Achira is Achira. What's my brother's is bad as far as I'm concerned. What's it mean? Pirush shechelek ochiv hoya be'enov ra. What was somebody else's was bad in the eyes of Achira. Be'erech chelkoi when compared to his chelek. Hoya se'enoi meleyo mechelek shenofel b'geiroloi. His eye was filled with pleasure, with delight, with appreciation in that which was his portion. He didn't seek things in terms of self-aggrandizing, in terms of his own position. He was just Malei Simcha, Simcha Sachai Meizeu Oshe HaSameach B'Chelkai. There are two things which I want to reference in conclusion before introducing our Rosh Beth Din, Dayan Gelley, who is going to share Divrei Torah, Divrei Chizuk, and Divrei Bracha with us. The Dayan had certain key catchphrases, And Jeremy Conway, in his beautiful article, which if you haven't seen it, you should have a look at it, Memories of the Dayan, references the way in which the Dayan would very often say, V'asisa k'chochmasecha. He would say to us, if we call ourselves his Talmidim, on occasion he would say to us, you do as you think makes sense. You do what you think is the right thing to do. I only came across your article because our associate Rav, Tzvi Portnoy, sent it to me and outlined V'asisa k'chochmasecha, said, Rabbi Ginsbury, is this where you got it from? Because I'm often saying to Rabbi Portnoy, V'asisa k'chochmasecha. And clearly, it's something which by osmosis, without even realizing it, I've absorbed from the Dayan. So thank you for that bit of an observation. But that empowerment to say, I've got confidence in you. I know that you've got wisdom. I know you've learned. You do as you see is right. And the other thing which we often heard from the Dayan at the end of his amazing shiurim was, Hinachti lecha mokum bolis gader. I've left room over for you as well to develop, to take further forwards the work that I've done. I've not given you a Dover Sholim here as well. I've given you a Dover Sholim Ad Kam, but you've got to work on and develop this further. I think that's a huge message for all of us. Hinachti lecha mokum bolis gader. We were privileged to bask in the glory of this great, great man. Great in midas, great in Torah, great in leadership, great in showing us a demus, a living example of what a Godel B'Torah in our very midst is all about. I want to thank, in particular, Reb Pini Hackenbroch in his absence, or Nosson Shlomo Liss in his presence, for the efforts they've put into making today possible. Once again, to thank you, Michael, for all the efforts the United Synagogue make to be partners with us in this, which really is, from the depths of our hearts, something that matters. You, Stephen, your professional team, likewise. The Rebbetzin, to give you our brachas that you should see from the family, only the ongoing nachas and bracha from all those incredible seeds that you and the Dayan sowed together over so many years, and the Mitzvah will continue to create beautiful peiros. And it's now my privilege just simply to introduce our esteemed Rosh Beth Din, Hinachti lecha mokum bolis gader. The Dayan has mamash been, I think, something so special, not only to each and every one of us, but a nachas ruach to Dayan Ehrentreu zt'l, to know that he has a successor who's taking us forward in the same way, with that sense of absolute unswerving loyalty, dedication, commitment to halacha, but equally with a sense of compassion, reality and realization of the times in which we live and the tzibur with which we engage. And we give him and his Beth Din our warmest brachas for ongoing hatzlocha in Torah, in Avodah, in Yiras Shamayim. And we should all be able to continue to bask in the wonderful memories that we share, and to be able to take forward the holy work, the Avodah HaKodesh of Dayan Ehrentreu zt'l in every possible way. Dayan Gelley.
The chairman of today's proceedings, Rabbi Ginsbury, standing in for Chief Rabbi, standing in for a few others. Kvoid my Choshever colleagues, Dayan Simons, Dayan Englander, Kvoid Choshever colleagues, Rabbonim, all Rabbonim of United Synagogue, the head of RCE and RCUS, and all the various denominations of our Choshever organization. Dayan Ehrentreu, I've had this chus. It's online, it's Dayan Ehrentreu. Offline, it's Auntie Ruchi. That's been the name I've been entitled to for the last 60 plus years. And Choshever family, Rabbi David Duna, Shlita, V'chol Habim Subin Kam, President of United Synagogue, and CEO, Dr. Wilson, and everybody who is assembled here today. So just to echo the opening comments of the previous speaker, of Rabbi Ginsbury, whereby he said it's Chanukah, and Chanukah is also behesped. As it is, I feel I'm a little bit greedy. I've already had the opportunity to publicly speak twice. Some of you will have been at Spadim, and I don't wish to repeat. But as we said, it's not a Spadim, it's issues that I believe we're able to learn. The centrality of Torah through the life of Dayan Ehrentreu. We mentioned that there were three planks that Dayan Ehrentreu was so special for, literally a legend I mentioned the Godel, the Manik, but for me it was a legend. It's legendary. In terms of everything pertaining to Torah, Limud HaTorah and Harbotzas HaTorah, pertaining to the Maisim Toivim, the fact that he was a Bal Maisim, and that's something we as Rabbonim, and if anything comes over as Musa, I'm talking to myself, so many times when we're faced with situations where, challenges and etc., and we can look away, walk away, slide away, not see, and etc., or we can take the issue and deal with it and attend to it. And that's what one of the big things Dayan Ehrentreu taught us as Rabbonim, that see to it, and see to it with an alacrity, and see to it straight away, and don't leave it, and see to it fully and properly, and contact the right people. And then there was the huge area of the Chasodim, which those Chasodim are legendary, over the years, going back many years to when I was a child, the stories that were a legend. Just tell you perhaps one story which hasn't been mentioned as far as I know in the various places I've been. This related to a younger man in Koilel, in the gates at Koilel, when Dayan Ehrentreu was a younger man in the gates at Koilel. He was an Avrech. And this younger man, a Talmid Chacham, he was from abroad, and he came and he developed a heart condition. And the prospects weren't good. It was the north of England, and it was an area that was undeveloped, unknown, the particular condition. And Bekitza, Dayan Ehrentreu got hold of top doctors. I think at that time was Magdi Yakub, or one with a sensationalist heart surgeon at the time, brought him to Harley Street. Now, who from Gateshead knew about Harley Street in those days? I'm talking about, 50 years ago. And brought him, made sure he had appropriate operation, sat with him, cared for him, looked after him. It cost money besides for the operation, the aftercare and everything. Made sure he was looked after in London, brought him back, and he built a large family, all B'nai Torah in Israel and around the world. And this great Rav carried on to be a Marbitz Torah in France, in Marseille, and in other places, and etc. And that's just amazing. So how many other people would know about it, will feel very sorry for the situation, but to actually get up and get hold of the people and the doctor and raise the funds and make sure it gets done and go with him and bring him back, that's absolutely unbelievable. And such as that story, friends, there are hundreds, there are thousands. But that's a plank that perhaps elaborate another time, because I think as Rabbonim again, and I'm putting all of this in the context of we as Rabbonim, what we can learn. We've got opportunities for chesed, and it takes courage to pick oneself up and to attend to things, but that's something that Dayan Ehrentreu, Zecher Tzaddik V'Kodesh Yevracha, taught us. But perhaps just a Dvar Torah referring to Chanukah. We say in the Alanissim that Masati Giborim B'yad Chaloshim, there was the mighty, you handed over to the hands of the weak, Rabbim B'yad Ma'atim, that the enemies, the Greeks, they were many and we were few. And this is the Halil of Hador, the praise we give, the Akdosh Baruch Hu, you saved us. But then Alanissim continues and says that Tmeim B'yad Tahirim, it was the impure in the hands of the pure, and it was Zaydim B'yad Oiskei Seira Secho, and it was the wicked people in the hands of those who learn Torah. The question is, why is that a miracle? And as you say, people who learn Torah normally eat less and are weak, and etc. So it's also a question of strong and weak. But it doesn't say that. So why is that mentioned as part of the Nes? And very briefly, the answer is possibly the following. I've seen this in various forum. When Yitzchak Avinu gave the bracha to Yaakov, Hakol Kol Yaakov Vayadayim Yidei Esav. So the Medrash says that Hakol Kol Yaakov, when is the Kol Kol Yaakov? When Ein HaYadayim Yidei Esav. But if HaYadayim, if Ein HaKol Kol Yaakov, if there's no Koil Kol Yaakov, then Hayadayim Yedei Esav, as if to say Esav will prevail. And the brother of the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Avram, asked the question on this, that it doesn't work, the drosha doesn't work with a Pashup Pshat in the Pasuk. That the Pasuk seems to say that HaKoil Kol Yaakov, then Hayodayim Yedei Esav. So when Yaakov is full with Torah, then Yodayim Yedei Esav, then Esav prevails. So now you know you're fitting a little ain. And that's not the Pashup Pshat. So he says no. He says that what the bracha of Yitzchak is, it's slightly longer, but I don't want to be marich now. The pasuk says Vayavorachehu, that this was a bracha that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov. The pasuk doesn't say what was the bracha. So he explains, no, the bracha of Yitzchak at that time to Yaakov was, you can have both. You can have a Kol Yaakov, but the Yodayim Yedei Esav, the koyach that enemies of Klal Yisrael normally have, that koyach can be yours. HaKoil Kol Yaakov Yodayim Yedei Esav, we give that all to Yaakov. Yaakov's also got a Yodayim Yedei Esav. You will prevail. But that's contingent to HaKoil Kol Yaakov. And indeed, we see replete through Tanakh. Whenever Klal Yisrael were poised for a battle, Dayan Ehrentreu used to say this Dvar Torah over often from the Ponevezh Rav. We can't be mariched now, the Gemara in Megillah, that exactly when they were poised for battle, that's when a Malach came, Sa'at Tzva Hashem, and told them, 1 second, what are you doing? Why aren't you learning? And he says, Ato Bosiv, Ato Kisu Lechem Sashira Hazois. The beautiful vault that Dayan Ehrentreu used to say over was that why did the Sa'at Tzva Hashem, this general who was leading them to battle, it didn't say it was a mashgiach with it was a general who led them to battle. What was he teaching them? He was teaching them that if you want to prevail in battle, then your koyach Torah has to be okay. And we don't learn it from Torah Tzivalon and Moshe Kilas Yaakov. We learn it from Apostle V'ata Kisul Lechem Sashira Hazois, because it's only when Torah is felt as a song, we delight in the limud HaTorah, and we give Torah the chashivos that Torah deserves. That's when one can go to battle and one can prevail in war. And elsewhere as well, with David HaMelech and Avner, every time there was a battle, we find references to Klal Yisrael being mechazik themselves in learning. And Ken Zayin, that's what we're saying in Al Anisim. We're not saying it's a miracle that there was Zaydim biyad oisko seresecho. But what the Al Anisim is teaching us is that the way which we will win our battles and our challenges, whether it means real battles, God forbid, on fronts fighting with other nations, or whether it means challenges, spiritual challenges from within, the way and the only way is HaKoil Kol Yaakov. And when HaKoil Kol Yaakov and Poti Midrashis are full, and there is a genuine chashivos, a harocha for Torah, then we know Klal Yisrael is on the derech to win. But that is the way, and that is the only way. And it's evident from the love Dayan Ehrentreu Zichroni Livrocha had for Torah and had for building Torah, is a deep understanding of the centrality of Torah in every Yid's life. It's not meant just for a few. And how in his own shul, and I'm remiss in not welcoming members of the Beis HaMedrash Beis Yisrael today who were so near and dear to him, what it meant Torah in his own shul. And every balabos, every single person should have their opportunity in their way, at their standard, and always try to up the standard of Torah, limud Torah for Rabbanim, and that's all these koilim and etc. Besides for being a Maaseh Chesed, etc. But it was his Habotzos HaTorah, where he felt the Habotzos HaTorah was the be all and end all, and that was going to save Klal Yisrael to the future. It's actually fascinating that Rabbi Aaron Kotler points out, if you think of the Neis Chanukah of the Neiros, that the whole miracle was to get us a little bit of Torah oil. And if we wouldn't have had the oil, so, okay, very regrettable, but we would have lit. A few days later, they would have had a menorah. So the Doiros, thousands of years, were celebrating Chanukah with a menorah. Why? because we had the opportunity of a mitzvah of adlokas menorah. We do not find this elsewhere in the history of Klal Yisrael. We don't find it that there was a nes simply to facilitate and enable Klal Yisrael to perform a mitzvah. It's Mavil al Arayan. But Rabbi Aaron says the message behind this, we all know that Chanukah, Menorah, and the Shemen, these are all references to Torah. Torah Shebichsav, could be more Torah Shebal Peh, and I don't have to elaborate. Everybody knows that from the Sforim, or Sheyachkim Yadrim, and where the Menorah was. Menorah again represents Torah. And what the Rebbeinu Shalom was giving us a nes at Chanukah was a nes of Shemen, symbolizing, denoting Torah and Limud Torah and Arbotzas Torah is that is the only way we're going to get through the Golus. If we were to remove Torah from the equation of the Golus that we're in, and even in Kila Kedosha, London, with all our beautiful facilities and schools and meisters, etc., we're in Golus Rabbi side. The way forward and the only way we can survive and we can grow in a Golus is with Limud HaTorah, and that is the message. Rebbeinu Shalom made this Neis Chanukah L'Doros to teach us that message. And that is exactly what Dayan Ehrentreu taught us in his daily life. Where Rabbi said, I can tell you hundreds of stories. I'm frightened to return to Aspert, and it's, we had humorous stories. I remember learning once on a Chol Hamoed Pesach, and there was a ring on the door. And okay, so there was a special delivery. This was quite a few years ago. And there was a message with it, a big box, and the Dayan put it on the table, and etc. Was it does? And so, okay. So started opening the package, and I saw wicker work. I said, Dayan Ehrentreu, this looks to me a bit like a hamper. Don't forget, it was Pesach, it was Chol Hamoed Pesach. So basically, not long before Pesach, he'd been on a trip to Gibraltar to see to the Shechita in La Linea, he'd gone with it, etc. And the British Airways, it hadn't worked out well, and then they had to come back without going. He was not happy about it, and there was a compensation, there was a hamper. So I said, I'm sure that, it's what you're talking about, hamper? Any case, so he starts opening, and a biscuits, some whiskey, and etc., the whole lot. Menachem, come with me, and we picked it up, and he says, I said, what we can do with it? Put it out on the street. Mafkir, I said, we could keep it cleaner, we could put it in the back somewhere. No, we're going to put it in the street. I want it Hefka, I don't want chametz on my premises. And out it went, and the hamper went on the street, and it sat there, and I don't think it was there too long, etc. Do you think I'm going to accept a hamper for what they did to me? And etc. But on a more serious note, I once went with to one of the provinces. It's my early days, must have been 25, 26 years ago, and we heard that the Shechita there, it was very problematic, let's put it like that. And we went there, and we looked at it, and I say, what's this all about? We're going to close it down. I said, Dayan, just 1 second, let's talk this through. This is another place, this is not London. Do we have a mandate? What are you talking about, mandate? We're going to close it down, and etc., and close it down. And that's it. And no one uttered a word. And it taught me a huge lesson in that. Don't fuff around. If it was correct to be done, then one's just got to have the courage to do it. As I heard from one Israeli politician, Rabbi Shapiro, Olav Shalom, he said, Samchut lokchim lo notnim. You don't wait to be given a mandate, you take a mandate. But when it came to Yiddishkeit, he felt that this wasn't sufficient, wasn't kosher, and there was no way it could be rectified. It had to do with the premises and the whole setup. Closed down. But a proviso will have to make sure that they get, it was poultry at that time, wasn't meat, we'll have to make sure they get it at a fair price from somewhere else, and he put that straight in place. Again, it was this Ish Maisa, this man of deeds, and extremely hard-working, long hours, and we used to travel very often to various shchitas over the country and abroad, and etc., I remember we were there, and whilst we were waiting for the next animal to come through and be shechted, he picked up a hose and he was washing down the floor and the thing. I said, actually, they employ people for that, etc. No, we're going to do it. It's got to be clean for when the next time, etc. It was just legendary. But what one's got to take from there is that the amelus in Torah, the amelus in Maisim, and the amelus. I use the word amelus. Amelus means to toil, which means to say is not just do things on the nod, to do things completely bishleimus and properly. And I think I've gone long beyond my remit. And Baruch Hashem, it's not a hesped, because I would be over the issue of being misatzel, bespedish or chacham, but it's not a hesped. It's just bringing forth what Chanukah, and we all know al sheisrashlu ba'avodah, that the whole sorrow came upon Klal Yisrael, that the Bach tells us, because they had become a little lax and lackadaisical in their approach. And therefore the tikkun of that was at that time where they pulled themselves together and they were willing to be moiser nefesh. And here we've seen a life of Mesiras Nefesh, and it really behoves us Rabbonim to take these messages and to think, how could we do something more? I think what some of us Rabbonim, are working flat out as it is and etc. So not necessarily more quantitatively, but perhaps qualitatively, to raise the bar in Limud Torah in as many shiurim we can do in shul as possible, because that is going to be the hatzalah for Klal Yisrael going forward, and certainly we have to worry for Anglo Jewry. And altogether, if we continue to learn and to analyze and to read up and to talk more about the gadlus of our great Rosh Beth Din, our Godel, our Manhig, then we'll be better served. We'll have so many lumudim to learn. And Mitzvah Shem should be a schus for the great neshama. It should be a melitz yosha for all of us. I don't have a suffix in Shemaim. Dayan Ehrentreu is working hard for all of us. He should be a melitz yosha for his choshev wife Tibodel L'chaim, and for all his family, and melitz yosha for Klal Yisrael. Amen v'amen.
Okay, B'shus Rosh Beth Din Dayan Gelley, Chaver Dayan Beanstalk, President United Synagogue, Mr. Michael Goldstein. It's a cover that you're sitting here with us today. And Chaverim, I just want to mention a few minutes. This share at the end of the day is Le'elu Nishmas Dayan HaKohen HaGodel Chanukah Ehrentreu Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. My memories, just for a couple of minutes, a particular point in my memories that I had with my close relationship with Dayan Ehrentreu. My close relationship is nowhere near as long as Dayan Gelley Shlita and Amotcha, goes back many, many years, although I knew Dayan Ehrentreu for many years. But the real close relationship only began the last 15 years when he retired from the London Beth Din. And the last 15 years, well, at least till 2 years ago when he became ill, I was very close to him. And I saw many, many strengths. But I want to speak about a particular koyach that he had, which only really came out in post-retirement, only once he retired. It was 4.5 weeks ago. It was Erev Shabbos Parshas Chayesora when Dayan Ehrentreu fell ill. Just before Shabbos, we heard, and we were very worried for his life and such like. And I was learning the parsha. There's a pasuk in Parshas Chayesora where the pasuk says, "Va'avom zokin bo bayomim Hashem bereches Avom bakel." A well-known pasuk, as Rashi tells us, bakel is the same gematria as Ben. Avram had a single son, 37 years old, and Rashi says, now that he had a single son, it was imperative, it was an obligation on him to marry off his son. And that's the pasuk of Avram Zokim Bo Bayomim. Interesting Lashon Bo Bayomim. The Klei Yokar already says Bo Bayomim. We've never seen except in one other place in the Haftarah of Parshas Chayesor. The David Zokim Bo Bayomim. But the Klei Yokar says Bo Bayomim is the wrong word. Bo Bayomim means he came in 2 days. Surely the best years of a person's life are the early years, when a person's got a lot of motivation, where he achieves a lot, he's got a lot of inspiration and such like. And it should be really Yotze Me'hayomim. Once you reach old age, and it's Yotze Me'hayomim. And I think the idea is, the Gemara tells us in Baba Kama, Matzpeah Shel Avraham Avinu, the coin that was created, the generation of Avraham Avinu, had a Zokin uskein on one side of the coin, an old man and an old woman on one side of the coin, or Bocha or Besula mitzad sheni, and on the other side of the coin was engraved a young boy and a young girl. And the simplest way of understanding that Gemara is that Avraham Avinu had the strength of a young person as well. He may have been a Zokin uskein, him and Sarah may have been old people, but they had the strength, they had the motivation, they achieved, and they had inspiration as a young couple. That was a koyach of Avraham Avinu. And this is Avraham Zokin Bo Bayomim, as we're going to see in a minute. And the same with David HaMelech. He was an old man at that time, but he was Bo Bayomim. What's the Bo Bayomim? Avraham Avinu had just lost his wife. He was a single father. He was left by himself. He was an old man. And he's left with a son. He'd already just found a Mokum Kavur, a place to bury his wife. And he has a son. This son was his future. HaKadosh Baruch Hu had promised him that through his son, his descendants, Ki be-Yitzchok yikorei l'chazara, it's through Yitzchok that ultimately Klal Yisrael will be born. And he was an old man. Yitzchok wasn't married. Yitzchok didn't have any children. The question was to Avraham Avinu, could he rely on HaKadosh Baruch Hu? HaKadosh Baruch Hu had promised him, Ki be-Yitzchok yikorei l'chazara, I'm an old man today. It's not my obligation. I've done enough in my lifetime. I don't need to achieve this anymore. I'll leave it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised me that I'm going to have children, Ki be-Yitzchok yikorei l'chazara, that through Yitzchok you're going to have descendants, then I'll leave it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avraham Avinu said no. He knew that without him doing his own ishtadlus, it would never happen. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have promised him that his descendants would have been through Yitzchok, but unless he does his ishtadlus, he does his bit, he gets up, it may be in his old age, but that was the koyach of Avraham Avinu. He knew that he couldn't leave things to Hashem, so to say. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, although he promises, he expects a person to do ishtadlus, and even in his retirement, in his old age, it's an obligation on him. He was so partial to Avraham Avinu that unless he marries him off, Yitzchok and Klal Yisrael will be lost forever. The same idea is with David HaMelech. David HaMelech in the Haftarah Malachim. We see that David HaMelech was promised by HaKadosh Baruch Hu that Shlomo HaMelech would follow him. He would continue Malchus Beis David. David HaMelech was a king, and through him, through Shlomo HaMelech, the Beis HaMikdash would be built, and Malchus Beis David would stay forever. And here the story goes, Adoniah ben Chagis, a half-brother of Shlomo HaMelech, he wanted to be king, and he was fighting to be king. And Bathsheba and Nosnanovi came to tell David HaMelech that it's not right. And David HaMelech got up, and he appointed, made sure that Shlomo HaMelech, in his old age, he was Bo Bayomim, he realized that it depends on him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu could have given him all the promises in the world, that the Beis HaMikdash will be built, that Malchus Beis David will be forever. As the Pasuk ends off, Bathsheba says, Yechi Adoniah Melech David La'olam, which is David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayom. It was at this point, because without David HaMelech's Hishtadlus, it would have been lost forever. It was only because David HaMelech was Zokim that he was Bo Bayomim. And that was my feeling. As I say, I was only really close to him the last 15 years, at a time when many people might say, well, they've retired, they can take it easy. But it was so posher to him, it was so clear to him, that he can achieve, he's able to achieve, and if he doesn't achieve, things will be lost, opportunities will be lost. And as we know, how much he achieved in those 15 years. Without going into all the pratim, the Torah he built, the chesed he did, how much he helped people, in many, many ways, many, many dimensions, but of course the koilim he built, even in London, which we're proud of, two koilim in Edgware and Bournemouth, is all Dayan Ehrentreu in his retirement, realizing that it's so possible by him. I don't think he had to think twice, that it's not good enough that Torah's promised, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has promised us that Torah will never be forgotten. Unless we do our shtadlus, it'll never work. And in his retirement, it's no excuse. And I think that possibly one of the limudim we need to learn from Dayan Ehrentreu is that not to, so to say, sit back and say HaKadosh Baruch Hu has promised us Torah, he's promised us that Torah will never be forgotten, so everything's fine. And secondly, that there's opportunities there which cannot be missed, and as we say, he was Zocher to Bo Bayomim. Okay, I want to move straight on to a Dvar Halacha, which at the end of the day, that's a Pinchas and Amnosson asked me to give. Dayan Gelley. The Dvar Halacha, the Marmakomis I've given, are the concept of mentioning Me'ein HaMe'urah on Yomim Tovim, Chanukah and Purim. As we know, in Shmoneh Esrei and in Birkas Hamazon, there's a chiyuv to mention the day. The Gemara in Sukkah learns out from a pasuk, Baruch Hashem Yom Yom. The Gemara says, Kol Yom Yom Ten Lom En B'Chosov. It's incumbent on everybody to mention that day when it's a Yom Tov, whether it's a Moed, whether it's Shabbos, whether it's Yom Tov, whether it's Chol Moed, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, whether Chanukah or Purim, or even on Tanesim. We always add in, Tanesim we don't normally eat, but we always add into Tefillah and Birkas Hamazon. There are some of these things that mention, some of these things we mention, which you can say they're not ma'akuv, or if you miss them out, you forget them, you don't repeat the Shemona Esrei and the Birkas Hamazon. Others, if you miss them out, you have to repeat it. You have to repeat the Birkas Hamazon or the Shemona Esrei. And the Gemara in Shabbos, it's the second Maramokim on page 1, which I quote, where the Brisa seemingly gives a criteria. When do you know whether it's an obligation that you have to go back if you miss it out or not? It depends if it's a Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf. For some reason, it depends on a Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf. Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Chol Moed, Yomim Tovim is a Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf. We have an extra Korban Musaf. For some reason, on a Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf, the Chiyuv to say, we'd say on Shabbos or Yalev Yovo and Shemona Esrei or Birkas Hamazon, wherever it is, both Tefillah and Birkas Hamazon, if it's a Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf, you have to go back. The Gemara talks about Tanesim, but the Rishonim say it applies to Chanukah or Purim. Chanukah or Purim, we say Ala Nisim. We say Ala Nisim both in Tefillah, in Shemona Esrei, and in Birkas Hamazon. But since Chanukah and Purim, the Rosh says, is a Yom She'ein Bo Musaf, although it's not explicitly mentioned in the Brisa, but it's a Yom She'ein Bo Musaf, that's the rule. Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf, Yom She'ein Bo Musaf. Chanukah or Purim, the Gon says all the extra bits we add in Ases, you make Shuvah, we also don't go back. HaMelech HaKodesh is a separate sugya, because they're Yom She'ein Bo Musaf. Yom She'ein Bo Musaf, we're obligated to mention them, but if we forget them, we don't go back. That seems to be the klal. We'll try and explain it a bit clearer, but that's what it appears. That's the Gemara in Shabbos halfway down. The Gemara at the top in Chof Daled Amalav has an interesting shaila about Ala Nisim on Chanukah. That is a given. We mention Ala Nisim in Shemona Esrei. Rashi says Chanukah, the whole point of Chanukah is Halal V'Hodah. We have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So in Shemona Esrei we have to say Ala Nisim. We've already mentioned, if you forget it, you don't go back. It's a Yom She'ein Bo Musaf. But it's incumbent, it's an obligation to say Ala Nisim in Shemona Esrei. The Gemara has it said that possibly in Birkas Hamazon one doesn't say Ala Nisim. Here the Gemara wants to differentiate that possibly there's no chiyuv to say Ala Nisim in benching, only in Shemona Esrei. And the Gemara says because it's only a Drabanon. Since Chanukah is only a Drabanon, it's not a Deraisa, it's like Shabbos, Yom Tov, Chol Moed and everything else. Therefore, possibly you don't mention it in benching. Benching is slightly lower than all other days. You don't mention it in benching. And in fact, what the Gemara seems to, the Maskana appears to be, the Gemara's Maskana is, one need not mention it. Well, the simple reading of the Gemara is that on benching one need not mention it. If one does mention it, it's like a hiddur mitzvah to mention it. Then one says in Hodah, the Bruch of Hodah, like Shemona Esrei, in Noidei Lecho one says Ala Nisim. But the simple reading of the Gemara is that Ala Nisim on Chanukah in Shemona Esrei is only reshus. It's not an obligation. The Rishonim, the Rambam appears to say not like that. He says as much as it's a chiyuv in Shemona Esrei, you don't go back, but it's still a chiyuv in Shemona Esrei to say Ala Nisim. In Birkas Hamazon, the simple reading of Shulchan Aruch is the same. That there's no difference between Shemona Esrei and Birkas Hamazon. As much as Shemona Esrei, one has to say Ala Nisim. Who are then in benching? One doesn't go back, one forgets it, but it is a chiyuv, benching exactly like Shemona Esrei. The Lechem Mishnah says, because Yerushalmi appears to argue with the Bavli, Yerushalmi seems to say it's a chiyuv, there's no difference in Shemona Esrei and Birkas Hamazon. And the simple reading of the Rambam and Shulchan Aruch is not like the Bavli, but it's a chiyuv in Birkas Hamazon as much as it is in Shemona Esrei. The Mogen Avraham, as we'll see, learns the Gemara Kipshutoi. The Ala Nisim in Birkas Hamazon is Ein et Tzorich Lahaski, V'maski B'aski B'Hodah. But that's the second chiddush that comes out. One more point is the Gemara in Brachos, which I quote on the second page, where, as we said, a Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf, any Yom Tov that's got Musaf, you have to mention Mein HaMeruah in Shemona Esrei and Birkas Hamazon, and if it's Yom Sheyesh Bo Musaf, if you forget it, you got to go back. The Gemara does make one exception. Rosh Chodesh is a Yom Sheyesh by Musaf. We bring Musaf. And in Shemona Esrei, you have to say Ya'alev Yov in Shemona Esrei. And if you forget it, you have to repeat Shemona Esrei. It's a Yom Sheyesh by Musaf. But Birkas HaMazon, if you forget Ya'alev Yov in Birkas HaMazon, although it's a Yom Sheyesh by Musaf, the Gemara in Bach says you don't go back because there's no chiyuv to eat a Suda on Rosh Chodesh. There's no obligation to eat a Suda. So Tefillah, there's a chiyuv Tefillah on Shabbos, Yom Tov, Chol Hamoed, Rosh Chodesh, so you have to say it in Tefillah. When it comes to Birkas HaMazon, you've got a mitzvah to eat bread on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, not Chol Hamoed, not Rosh Chodesh, but Shabbos, Yom Tov, and therefore you have to say you would say on Shabbos in benching, and if you forget it, you go back. But you have a mitzvah, you have to eat a Suda. Rosh Chodesh and Chol Hamoed, where there's no chiyuv Suda, there you say Ya'alev Yovah in benching, but since there's no chiyuv Suda, there's only chiyuv Tefillah, there's no chiyuv Suda, if you forget Ya'alev Yovah in benching, you don't go back. That's a Gemara in Brachas. That's a klal. Comes the Magen Avraham in Simon Kuf Peiches, this is on page 3, where he says an interesting chiddush. He says two chiddushim. The first one is not too much of a chiddush, but the problem is the second one. He's basically talking, first case is he talks about Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, I mean, often Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbos, and he's benching on Friday night, and he forgets Ritzei. If you forget Ritzei in Birkas HaMazon, you have to go back. Like we said, it's a Yom Sheyesh by Musaf. There's a chiyuv Suda on Shabbos, so if you forget Ritzei Friday night, you have to go back. It was Rosh Chodesh as well, so you had to have said Ya'alev Yovah. Now this person forgot to say Ritzei, but he said Ya'alev Yovah for Rosh Chodesh. The halacha is if you forget to go say Ritzei, there's a chiyuv Suda on the Yom Sheyesh by Musaf, you have to go back. He's got to repeat the benching. What about when he repeats the benching, does he have to say Ya'alev Yovah again? But at the end of the day, you could argue he's already said Ya'alev Yovah in the first benching. So maybe there's absolutely no obligation at all to say Ya'alev Yovah in the second benching. You may argue in Svar, of course you have to. The Magen Avraham says, yes, you have to repeat Ya'alev Yovah. In the first benching, you said Ya'alev Yovah. You never said Ritzei for Shabbos. You have to go back. You never said Ritzei for Shabbos. You have to repeat the benching. Once you repeat the benching, you have to say Ya'alev Yovah in the second benching as well. I may have said it in logically. Why not? You're benching, so of course you've got to say Ya'alev Yovah. It may not be a chiyuv to eat Suda for Chodesh, but you have to mention Ya'alev Yovah. You don't go back for it. But there is a chiyuv to mention Ya'alev Yovah in Chodesh. So Friday night I have to repeat the benching because I missed I would say. So the Magen Avraham says you repeat Ya'alev Yovah. He doesn't say Minasvar. He quotes it from a Gemara in Shabbos. I haven't mentioned like Moed, I'm going to come back to it, but he brings a proof from a Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Chof Daled. If we just read it, we already started the next bracha. He's talking about on Shabbos of Chodesh. The Chayzer Rosh, and he forgot to say, he's got to repeat the benching because it would say, L'kula Alma, he had a machlekes Mechab and Torah before, but he says, according to everybody, Maskis Rosh Chodesh. Although the only thing he forgot was Ritzei. He said Ya'alev Yovah first time round, but he's got to go back because he never said Ritzei of Shabbos. When he goes back, he has to mention Ya'alev Yovah as well. Then he gives a reason. The B'chol Birkas HaMazon Maskis Rosh Chodesh Dumya. Then to the Gemara in Shabbos will come back and he brings the Raya. So far, so good. We can understand that. It's not too much of a chiddush. At the end of the day, he is repeating Shemona Esrei. Shemona Esrei requires Ya'alev Yovah. It's true he said Ya'alev in the first one, but he has to repeat Shemona Esrei because he forgot to say. Now that he's repeating, he has to say Ya'alev Yovah. However, says the Magen Avraham, that's all by Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. What about Shabbos Chanukah? Friday night, Chanukah, Shabbos Chanukah. He has to say Ritzei for Shabbos, and Al Hanissim, now we said, we say Al Hanissim for benching as well. He forgot to say Ritzei. He did say Al Hanissim, but he forgot to say Ritzei. He has to repeat Birkas HaMazon again. On Shabbos, there's a Yom Sheyesh by Musaf, there's a chiyuv, so you have to go back. So he's already said Al Hanissim in the first one. Do you say, just as when Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, you repeat Ya'alev Yovah in the next tefillah, who are in Al Hanissim, although you already said Al Hanissim in the first one, you don't say, you still have to say in the second one, like we say Shabbos Rosh Chodesh or not. And this is where he comes up with his incredible chiddush. V'nera li, it appears to me, says the Magen Avraham, to Chanukah b'Shabbos, when the hiskish shel Chanukah v'lo Shabbos, if it's not Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, it's Shabbos Chanukah, and he said Al Hanissim, but unfortunately he forgot to say, Chayzer Rosh, he has to go back, but he never said it say, ve'enoi maskish shel Chanukah, but he doesn't repeat Al Hanissim. And probably means one shouldn't repeat Al Hanissim because it's a hefsek. If you don't need to. He says, you know why? Because that Gemara that we quoted earlier on, that the whole concept of mentioning Al Anissim in Birkas Hamazon on Chanukah is really you don't need to. Gemara says, you don't need to. If you want to, you say it in the Haidah. Of all the different Askos, Shabbos, Yontiv, Shmoneh Esrei, Birkas Hamazon, Birkas Hamazon on Chanukah is the least important. You don't really need to mention Allah. It's only a Drabanon. You don't need. He learned the Gemara Kipshutoi that there's no real obligation to mention Al Anissim in Birkas Hamazon on Chanukah. So the whole thing is only Ein Choiva. If it's Ein Choiva, then says the Magen Avraham, he feels that the whole thing is anyway Ein Choiva. Normally we say we do it. In Bola Haskim Maske B'Hoidah. But here anyway you said it first time round in the first one. Therefore, you don't mention the second one. And therefore, when you repeat the Birkas Hamazon for say, you do not repeat Al Anissim. And this year, where we have Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh, and Shabbos, we have 3 Askos Friday night. We have to mention say that's important. We say Yalla V'Yov for Rosh Chodesh, and we say Al Anissim for Chanukah. We generally do say the Birkas Hamazon. And somebody forgets to say say, he has to repeat the Birkas Hamazon. According to Magen Avraham, even though he mentioned Al Anissim and Ya'aleh V'Yavoy, he will have to repeat Ya'aleh V'Yavoy for Rosh Chodesh, but he won't repeat Al Anissim for Chanukah. That's what it appears that the Magen Avraham is machalek between Al Anissim on one hand and Ya'aleh V'Yavoy Rosh Chodesh on the other hand. That in a case when you go back, although in the first one you mention the right one, you go back and you repeat Ya'aleh V'Yavoy for Rosh Chodesh, but you don't repeat Al Anissim for Chanukah. Not very clear what the Magen Avraham means. The only thing he does say at the end, he says, because anyway, Al Anissim is not a proper choiva. So Mamela, it's a question of a hefzer. It needs a lot of explanation. But, yeah, sorry.
If you've got say and Al Anissim,
then possibly you will have to. Yeah. But let's leave that out. It needs thinking about. I would have thought so, yeah. But it may depend on what we're going to say.
Dayan,
Yeah.
I'm standing here on Giants, I have the Mesivta open.
Yeah.
Just to say, but the Maram Bennett
Yeah, Maram Bennett.
is medayik from the Rashi, who says, Lo maskirinan, lo yichayev lahaskir, that there is no issue of...
Hefsek. Hefsek, yeah. Yeah. So that's the Chizr Magen Avraham. The problem is much more complicated because the Mishnah Berurah, and it comes from Pri Megadim, they bring out the first half of the Magen Avraham. Again, the Magen Avraham says that on Friday night Rosh Chodesh, let's see about Chanukah, you said with saying you didn't say Ya'aleh V'Yavoy, you have to repeat Birkas Hamazon and you say Ya'aleh V'Yavoy again. Says the Pri Megadim, I've quoted the next paragraph on page 3. After Zocher Rosh Chodesh Kedina, Kim the Chodesh Eluish Birkas Hamazon b'Shul Shabbos, Hava command de Borech Klal. You know why you have to repeat Ya'aleh V'Yavoy? Because you haven't benched. The first time you forgot to would say on Shabbos. If you forget to say on Shabbos, it's as though you missed a whole bracha. The Minato you have to say 3 brachas. If somebody would only say 2 out of 3, he has to re-bench. He hasn't benched. There's 18 brachas if you in Shmoneh Esrei. If you say 16, you have to bench again. You have to daven again. The Pri Megadim says when he missed say, it's not he just missed say. He hasn't benched. Let's see the words again. So of course you haven't benched yet. Anybody who comes and benches on the Chodesh is going to say Ya'aleh V'Yavoy. But it's not as though he's benched and he's just repeating to gain say. He hasn't benched. Full stop. That's the yesod of the Pri Megadim. Mishnah Berurah says it the same. If we can just, the next paragraph. The Birkas Hamazon Rishon nisbatel legamri. The first Birkas Hamazon is, we say command the lesser. He never benched. This is the first time he's benching. That's why he has to repeat Ya'aleh V'Yavoy. He may have said Ya'aleh V'Yavoy first time, but he never said Ritzei. Ritzei is an intrinsic part of Shmoneh of Birkas Hamazon. He never said it. It's like missing a half of Birkas Hamazon. Of course you got to repeat it because you missed it out. And that's why it says a Pri Megadim and Mishnah Berurah why you have to say Ya'aleh V'Yavoy. Very nice pshat in the Magen Avraham. But where we're going to get stuck is then why Chanukah? On Shabbos Chanukah, do we say that you don't repeat Al Anissim? If you didn't say Ritzei, you did say Al Anissim, next time round you only have to say Ritzei, you don't say Al Anissim. So the Magen Avraham says because there's no proper chiyuv. But if we're going to cancel the first Birkas Hamazon, he's back to square one. He's like any person like you and me who haven't benched yet. The Lashon Mishnah Berurah was Nispatel legamri. There's been no benching yet. This is the first time he's benching. If it's the first time he's benching, of course, as much as he has to say Ya'alev Yovon Leil L'Shchodesh, he has to say Al Hanissim. It may be there's no proper chiyuv, but it's very difficult to differentiate between Ya'alev Yovon one and Al Hanissim. The way the Mishnah Berurah and the vote of the Pri Megadim is really an extremely important shayla. All these times you go back, on Yom Tov, on Shabbos, on Chodesh, you go back if you miss it out. Ya'alev Yovoy, in Shmoneh Esrei, and every time you got to go back. How do we look at it? For instance, let's keep it simple. Somebody forgets to say on Friday night in benching, or he misses a Ya'alev Yovoy on Rosh Chodesh and Shmoneh Esrei. So the halach is you have to go back. How do we look at it? Do we look at it like the way the Pri Megadim says, that it becomes, the Ritzei of Shabbos becomes an intrinsic part of Birkas HaMazon. And by missing, I would say, it's as if you haven't benched at all. And when you miss a Ya'alev Yovon Shmoneh Esrei Rosh Chodesh, it's a Yom Sheish by Musaf, it becomes an intrinsic part and you haven't davened at all. And the reason why we go back is because you haven't yet davened. Or no, we could have looked at it a different way, that you have benched. You have davened, but you had an obligation to say Ritzei in benching or Ya'alev Yovon Shmoneh Esrei Rosh Chodesh. You've lost out that obligation, so you repeat the Shmoneh Esrei not to gain the Shmoneh Esrei. You've benched. You've said all 18 brachas every other day of the month. You say you've said the exact Shmoneh Esrei like it is no Rosh Chodesh. You've been Yotzi Shmoneh Esrei. You're only repeating it because to gain the obligation of saying Ritzei in benching or Ya'alev Yovon Rosh Chodesh and Shmoneh Esrei. Again, is it commanded less of the first one? That the Ritzei in Birkas HaMazon becomes a part of the nusach of benching. Normally we only have 3 brachas or 4 brachas in Birkas HaMazon. On Shabbos we have 4 brachas plus Ritzei. And if anybody leaves out part of it, they haven't benched. That's one way. That's why we have to go back. On Yom Sheyesh by Musaf, it becomes an intrinsic part of the nusach, and you haven't benched. That appears to be the Pri Megadim and the Mishnah Berurah. Or no, you have benched. Benching is only 3 brachas or 4 brachas. We would say something on Shabbos, it's an added hoisofa. And although you missed, I would say, you've zech bin yotze Birkas HaMazon. You only repeat the Birkas HaMazon because in order to gain the chiyuv of Ritzei. It's well known that this is in fact in Machlokes Tosfos and the Rosh. Tosfos and the Rosh in brachas, a very simple mashal. Tosfos and the Rosh have a discussion. On Rosh Chodesh afternoon in Mincha, a person has to say Ya'alev Yovon. We know it's a Yom Sheish by Musaf, you have to say Ya'alev Yovon in Mincha. Somebody forgets Ya'alev Yovon in Mincha on Rosh Chodesh, he has to repeat Shmoneh Esrei. He didn't repeat it, he forgot to repeat it. Comes to Motzei Rosh Chodesh. Normally if you miss out one tefillah, there's a din taslim. If you miss out Mincha, you'd have a married twice. So, this person in Mincha missed a Ya'alev Yovon. So what does he, and he missed a Ya'alev Yovon, he has to repeat it, and he didn't repeat it, and it comes to Motzei Rosh Chodesh. And it comes to Motzei Rosh Chodesh. Does he have to repeat it? The Tosfos says in brachas that by missing out Ya'alev Yovon, there's no purpose in repeating it. If you miss out Mincha one day, you daven Mincha afterwards, because you haven't done Mincha. But the problem, Mincha on Motzei Rosh Chodesh, you don't say Ya'alev Yovon. If you miss out Mincha completely on Rosh Chodesh, if you don't say any Rosh Chodesh, you repeat it on Motzei Rosh Chodesh, you say twice. You're not going to say Ya'alev Yovon, but you never daven Mincha. So of course you've got to repeat Ma'ariv twice, although you don't say Ya'alev Yovon. But if you daven Mincha, says Tosfos, and you missed out Ya'alev Yovon, you have to repeat Mincha straight after with Ya'alev Yovon. But it got to Motzei Rosh Chodesh and it's only one day Rosh Chodesh. So what you're going to do now? You're going to repeat the Shmoneh Esrei. You're not going to gain your Ya'alev Yovon. So there's no chiyuv to say twice Ma'ariv, because you gain nothing, says Tosfos. You've davened anyway. You just want to gain your Ya'alev Yovon, what it appears, and there's no point in repeating it because you're not going to gain anything. That's the Lashon Tosfos quoted very quickly on the page 4. Tosfos says you don't go back. Let's see very quickly, running short of time. It's to the top of page 4 on the right hand side, Chavovon base. If you forgot to mention Ya'alev Yovon Mincha, lo yispal oy balayla. You shouldn't daven again twice. Balayla. The lama yispal al oid. Why should you daven the second time? He's already daven Mincha. The only thing he missed out was Ya'alev Yovon. You're not going to gain anything to repeat twice. You're not going to say that Ya'alev Yovon. What it appears from Tosfos is you can't say the person who missed out Ya'alev Yovon on the afternoon Chodesh is he hasn't davened full stop. If you're going to say he hasn't davened, of course there's a purpose to repeat twice Shmoneh Esrei. He may not gain a Ya'alev Yovon, but he just hasn't davened. He missed out. If you're going to say that Ya'aleh v'Yavo and the Tefillah Sheyesh by Musaf is entrenched, you haven't been Yotze like we saw in the Prima Godim, then you haven't done full stop. Of course you should be davening a second time on Motzei Chodesh, even if you don't say Ya'aleh v'Yavo. The answer is, the Achronim say, the Stipler and many Achronim say, in Tosfos holds that Avada Yov Daven Kedas Ukadin, and you're only repeating it to gain Ya'aleh v'Yavo. And if it's Motzei Chodesh, you're not going to gain anything, then there's no point in repeating it. The Rosh disagrees. Very quickly, the Rosh is on the next paragraph. B'Shem Chachmei Provinza, they came from France. Hoyoimim, no. You have to repeat Maya the second time on Motzoi Rosh Chodesh, although you don't say Ya'aleh v'Yavo. Kiven Shlei Yotzli Chavotze Bezuah Tefillah. He was never Yotze Tefillas Mincha Rosh Chodesh. Havelei Ki Ilu Lo Hispalo. If he missed Ya'aleh v'Yavo on Rosh Chodesh, he just hasn't davened. Somebody who hasn't davened on Rosh Chodesh has to repeat Maya twice. Of course, he's not going to get his Ya'aleh v'Yavo, but he never davened. What it appears clear is, according to the Chachmei Provinza, when you miss out a Me'ena Me'ura, it's Kilu you haven't davened. Like we said from the Prima Godim and the Mishnah Berurah. Tosfos says no. You have davened, you're only repeating Shemini Esrei in order to gain. If you look very quickly at it's Meduik in the Rambam, page 3 at the bottom, I bring you various Lashonis of the Rambam, where the Rambam talks about all the extra things we say in Tefillah and Birkas Hamazon. Whenever it's things that we don't go back for, such as Alanissim, he calls it a Hoisofa. Yesh lo Hoisef Alanissim. When it's things we go back for, he says Yesh lo Imra. We're running short of time, but I'm going to Rosh Echad Chodesh Moed Mispal Av Shachim Rosh Chodesh V'Oime Bavod Ya'aleh v'Yavo. Ya'aleh v'Yavo in Tefillah, where you go back, the Rambam calls it Oime. It becomes part of the Nusach, so much so that the Chachmei Provinza say, if you B'Chanukah Purim Meisifin, he says we add in. It's an extra extension, but it doesn't become part of the Nusach. We haven't got time, but if you go to all the Rambam clearly differentiates. That's what it appears to be the Chachmei Provinza. Coming back to this Mogen Avram, the Prima Godim says, you know why? On Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, in benching, if you miss I would say, you said Ya'aleh v'Yavo. You have to, and you repeat Birkas Hamazon. You have to say Ya'aleh v'Yavo again, because if you miss I would say Loi Hispalo Klal Klal. You haven't benched. You haven't benched Klal Klal. And that's why you go back. He seems to be going with the Chachmei Provinza that you haven't benched, and that's why you need to go back and say you would say. The problem is, like we mentioned earlier, so why not Alanissim? The other problems are, firstly, we don't pass on the Chachmei Provinza. We hold that if somebody, halacha, you have to know, if somebody forgets Ya'aleh v'Yavo on Rosh Chodesh afternoon, where he has to repeat the Shemini Esrei while it's still Rosh Chodesh, and he forgets to repeat it, and he comes to Motzei Rosh Chodesh, he cannot simply just repeat another Shemini Esrei, say a second one, like the Chachmei Provinza. He can only do it b'toyos nadava. Because it's a suffix. The Ikar Shita, we chayiv for Tosfos, that you gain nothing out of repeating Shemini Esrei. We hold like Tosfos, seemingly, that it doesn't become part of the Nusach. You've already been Yotze Yom Mincha. You only go back to get that extra thing. On Motzei Rosh Chodesh, you don't get back. You're not going to gain that extra thing, which appears to suggest that the Ikar Shita is not that it's considered. So you have, I apologize. We can speak afterwards. It appears that the Ikar Halacha is you don't look at it as though he hasn't benched at all. So the Prima Godim Mishnah Berurah says that on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, if you forget what to say and you repeat it, you have to repeat Ya'aleh v'Yavo as well in the next one, because you haven't benched at all. It's not correct halacha. Of course you're benched. How can the Prima Godim Mishnah Berurah say you haven't benched at all? That's the Chachmei Provinza, but we don't pass on it. There's no concept of Nadova by benching. So you can't do it. You can't be Yotze. He has benched. So how can the Mishnah Berurah and Prima Godim say bench? The other point on Anissim, Rabbi say the Mogen Avram also doesn't seem to say like the Prima Godim. If you look clearly at the Mogen Avram again inside, you know why. Let's say very quickly. When you repeat again Friday night Rosh Chodesh, you forgot what to say. You have to repeat it. And you mentioned Ya'aleh v'Yavo the first time. Kula alma maskeh Rosh Chodesh, to bechol bichas hamozgem maskeh Rosh Chodesh, dumya diyem kippur sheyem shnischai ba'arba tefillos. He says a whole yesod here, the Mogen Avram. Not apparently not like the Prima Godim. The Gemara in Shabbos, that's the third Ma'amokim on page 1, where the Gemara has a shaila. Do you say Alanissim on Chanukah, which falls on Rosh Chodesh? All tefillos, Shachris Mincha Mai, we say Alanissim. But Musaf of Rosh Chodesh, on Chanukah, every Chanukah has a Rosh Chodesh as well. The Musaf, the Gemara has a tzad that you don't say Alanissim. Why? Because the Chiv Musaf doesn't come from Chanukah. Chanukah, you only chayiv 3 tefillas, like every day of the year. The chiyuv musaf comes from Rosh Chodesh. Says the Gemara, maybe you don't have to mention Al HaNis. So that's the shayla of the Gemara. The Gemara says, no, you still mention it. You still mention Al HaNisim. Although musaf of Rosh Chodesh, the cause of this musaf is nothing to do with Chanukah, it's Rosh Chodesh, but the Gemara brings right from Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur. Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur, the 4th tefillah, is because of Yom Kippur. What happens if Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos? Do you have to mention Shabbos in Ne'ilah? The Gemara says you do. Although the Ne'ilah doesn't come because of Shabbos, it comes because of Yom Kippur. Because at the end of the day, any tefillah that you say on Shabbos, even if the chiyuv is not because of Shabbos, you have to mention Shabbos. So any extra tefillah on Chanukah, even on the Shechid, where there's 4 tefillahs, extra one musaf, you have to mention on this. That's the Gemara. Says the Magen Avraham here as well. What he appears to be saying is that when you go back and you repeat your benching, you forgot what you repeat it, the only chiyuv is not as Rosh Chodesh, it's only as Shabbos, you forgot what it say. It's the chiyuv, the second Birkas Hamazon is not that you haven't benched. That Prima Godim said, of course you bench, but it's a Shabbos dika chiyuv. Maybe you could argue that was a Havamin of the Magen Avraham. This second benching is only mitzad Shabbos. Maybe you don't say Al HaNisim. Of them he says no. The Gemara says like Ne'ilah and like Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah. But clearly it appears not like the Prima Godim, not because you haven't benched. If you haven't benched, of course you have to repeat Ya'alev Yahweh. You just haven't benched. Of course the Magen Avraham seems to say you have benched, but the chiyuv comes because of Shabbos, not because of Rosh Chodesh. Maybe not. So he's medamid. Rabbi Yisrael, I think, say Pshat in the Prima Godim, Mishnah Berurah, and the Magen Avraham. I know we're cutting quickly, but you have to. Basically, let's start with the tzad of the Chachmei Provenza. Chachmei Provenza say that every time you miss out on a haskara in Shmoneh Esrei, be it Ya'alev Yahweh on Shabbos or Yom Tov for Chodesh, you have to go back because Yom Sheyesh Boi Musaf. A day that's called Musaf, you have to go back, and the Chachmei Provenza say it becomes an intrinsic part of the Shachris, Mincha, and Mariv. Shachris on Sunday to Friday has no Ya'alev Yahweh. Let's keep a simple case. Shachris, all the days of the month, has no Ya'alev Yahweh in it. Says the Chachmei Provenza, but on Shachris, of Rosh Chodesh, the Nusach has an extra brach of Ya'alev Yahweh, which is a bit incredible, because how can that be? The Chiyuv Shachris and Rosh Chodesh is the same Chiyuv as yesterday and the day after. And that Chiyuv doesn't not mechayiv Ya'alev Yahweh. Why, when it suddenly falls on Rosh Chodesh, does Ya'alev Yahweh become an intrinsic part of the Shmoneh Esrei? If there would be a special Chiyuv of Shachris on Rosh Chodesh, so you can say it's a Yom Sheyesh by Musaf is Kedusha, so Ya'alev Yahweh becomes part of the Nusach. But it's not like that. The Chiyuv to daven Shachris on Rosh Chodesh is the same Chiyuv as yesterday and tomorrow. So why does Ya'alev Yahweh, according to the Chachmei Provenza, become part of the Nusach? And the answer to my mind is the Gemara in Zvachim. We have to go very quickly, I apologize. The Gemara's got a shaila in Zvachim. We know the halach is tzadeh v'sheina tzadeh kodim. If you have 2 mitzvahs, you always, and one is comes out more often than the other one, you always do the tzadeh kodim. Mekudesh v'eina mekudesh kodim. If you have 2 mitzvahs, one is more holy, in inverted commas, than the other one, you always do the one that's more holy first. Says the Gemara, what happens if you have tzadeh against mekudesh? One mitzvah is more tzadeh than the other one, but the other one is more mekudesh than the first one. Which one goes first? The Gemara says, I've got a simple proof. Every Rosh Chodesh you bring a korban tomid and then the korban musaf. Korban tomid is todeh. You bring it every day of the month. Musaf is mekudesh. It's a yom sheish b'kedusha. Rosh Chodesh, that's how we bring an extra musaf. So the tomid is todeh and the musaf is mekudesh. You see that the todeh comes before mekudesh. So the most proven. Says more, you're wrong. Why is a musaf mekudesh? Because it comes because of Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh you bring a musaf and it's a yom sheish b'kedusha. Says the Gemara, just to quote the Lashon, 3rd paragraph down on the last page. Otu, most about Shabbos. Just go back to the middle paragraph. Toshma Shmidin Kedem Musafin. Va'af agav de Musafin Kedisha. Otu Shabbos Musafin Ahana leTmidim leHani. Does the Kedusha of Shabbos only Mekadesh a Korban Musaf? It's Mekadesh a Korban Tomid as well. In other words, what the Gemara is an incredible Chiddush. Korban Tomid is a Chiyuv, a generic Chiyuv. Every day of the year you have to bring a Korban Tomid. And the Chiyuv Korban Tomid on Shabbos is no different than the Chiyuv. It comes from the same Pasuk in Parashat Pinchas. But once it's brought on a Yom Sheyesh B'I Kedusha, such as Rosh Chodesh or Shabbos, then not only has the Musaf become more sanctified, in inverted commas, but the Tomid is also more Kodesh. So you know why Tomid comes before Musaf, because not only is a Tomid Chodir, it's also Mekudesh. The Gemara says it's incredible Chiddush that Chodesh, which is a day that we bring a Musaf, the Korban Musaf becomes Mekudesh, it makes the Tomid as well more Mekudesh. That's what the Gemara says, that the Kedusha of a Chodesh affects the Tomid as well. And the Tomid is not only Todim Mekudesh as well. The Gemara says the same by Boi Priagofen on Shabbos. When we make a Boi Priagofen in Kiddush, Boi Priagofen is Todir, and the Kiddush is Mekudesh. Says the Gemara, you got to write Todis before Mekudesh. Says the Gemara, no. The Kedusha Shabbos affects the Boi Priagofen. Every day of the week when we drink wine, we make Boi Priagofen. It's no special chiyuv of making Boi Priagofen on Shabbos. But the Shabbos affects the Boi Priagofen, becomes Mekudesh. And finally, the Gemara says, like about Tfilis as well. The Gemara says that on when the day that is Musaf, if you forget to daven Shacharis, Mincha, the question is which one do you daven first? Not only is Tfilis Musaf Mekudesh, but Tfilas Mincha on Rosh Chodesh is more Mekudesh. That's the incredible Chiddush that comes out from the Gemara in Zvachim. Coming back, we asked a question: why do the Chachmei Povansia hold that it becomes a chelik of the Nusach a Yalev Yovoy in davening, a Yalev Yovoy Mincha on Rosh Chodesh afternoon? It becomes a chelik of the nusach. I asked you that the mincha of Rosh Chodesh comes from a chiyuv which has nothing to do with Rosh Chodesh. It's no more meyuchas than the mincha of yesterday and mincha of tomorrow. But it's not true like the Gemara says in Zvachim, although the chiyuv is one chiyuv to daven mincha the whole month, but when it comes on a day sheish bo kedusha, it's completely different type. It's a shmei neshes sheish bo kedusha. And that's why the Chachmei Povansia hold that it becomes a chelik of the nusach because it's a kodesh ticket tefillah. Mincha on Rosh Chodesh afternoon is more mekudesh than mincha the rest of the month, and that's why Yalev Yovah becomes part of the nusach. So much so that if you miss Yalev Yovah, you haven't done v'yam b'nyotza. The other Rishonim, Tosfos, only argues on one nekudah. They agree to everything. It becomes part of the nusach. That I'll talk about again. Rosh Chodesh mincha, where mincha is a chiyuv the whole month. They also agree to the Gemara in Zvachim that the mincha of Rosh Chodesh is more mekudesh, and Yalev Yovah becomes, and it's a different type of tefillah. On Rosh Chodesh afternoon, the mincha is a mekudesh tefillah. And if you miss out Yalev Yovah, you haven't done a mekudesh tefillah. But they only argue, but you've still been yotza the generic mincha. The generic mincha you've still been yotza. Avada there's a mincha plus on Rosh Chodesh afternoon because it's Yom Sheish Bekedusha. If you miss a Yalev Yovah, you have to repeat it. Because I haven't been yotza my mekudesh tefillah. But I have been yotza the generic tefillah. Remember, that's what they say. If you miss out, everybody agrees that it becomes a chelik of the nusach. All they say is, you've nevertheless been yotza the generic tefillah. Say, the case of Tosfos, Mincha Rosh Chodesh afternoon, where you forgot Yalev Yovah. It says, Tosfos, there's no point, and you forgot to repeat tefillah till night. Says there's no point in repeating. Doesn't mean you've been yotza your Rosh Chodesh tikka mincha. You haven't been yotza Rosh Chodesh mincha. That Kodesh tikka mincha haven't been yotza. But there's no point in going back, but you can't say you haven't been yotza anything. Chachmei Povansia holds if you haven't been said Yalev Yovah, the Kodesh tikka mincha you haven't got. And therefore you haven't been yotza anything. So you have to, if you haven't done it at all, you have to repeat it. But the Tosfos says, of course you haven't been yotza, you were Chodesh tikka tefillah. But the generic mincha you've been yotza, and the one you do Matzos Chodesh is anyway the generic ma'ariv, so you gain nothing. Now, both said that's flat in the Magen Avraham Pri Megadim. I apologize going over time, but very quickly, that's what he's saying. Avada, if somebody would say on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, he forgot to say, everybody agrees you haven't been yotza the mekudesh tikka because Hamosna would say, and you have to repeat it. But you've been yotza your Yalev Yovah. You've been yotza the generic Birkas HaMazon because you never go back to Rosh Chodesh. You've been yotza the generic Rosh Chodesh. Says the Magen Avraham, but nevertheless you go back. Because although the chiyuv to go back is a Shabbos tikka benching, when the Pri Megadim says you haven't been yotza your benching, he doesn't mean like the Chachmei Povansia you haven't been yotza any benching. You haven't been yotza the Shabbos tikka benching. Yeah, the Ritzei becomes an intrinsic, you haven't been said the enhanced Birkas HaMazon of Shabbos. You have to go back. You have to go back. The cause is for Shabbos. Of them of the Magen Avraham that you still say Yalev Yovah because it's a day that you have to mention 4 tefillahs, although the chiyuv is not from Rosh Chodesh, it's only from Shabbos. Mashenk in Chanukah doesn't. Pri Megadim never said you weren't yotza at all. Of course you were yotza. Chanukah you were yotza. There was no kedusha in Chanukah. Chanukah has no kedusha. You've been yotza your alanis. We never meant to say you haven't benched full stop. You haven't benched the Shabbos tikka benching, and therefore you repeat it. That's all the Pri Megadim Mishur mean. And but you've been yotzer, you're a shchaydish benching. And since there's no real chiv to say ala nisim, says among everyone one shouldn't say ala nisim. But the Mishabura and Prima God never meant to say you haven't benched full stop. You just haven't benched, according to Tosus in Brachas, the Ikashita, you haven't benched this kedusha dika benching. That's what they mean. And that's why you have to repeat it, Rabbi said. Okay, so apologies.